The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
We've successfully avoided talking, at least directly, about polling this week, but I think it does make sense, since we're just a few days out from the election, to do a quick review of where things stand right now. There's been the talking point this week from Trump surrogates, if you've been paying attention to corporate media, and if you haven't, congratulations, that the race is tightening, and the Trump surrogates say it's tightening. We're doing well in early voting in Florida. We're just doing well, and it's tightening, and Trump is right in this thing. Is that true? Well, fortunately, we have data we can look at to figure out if that is indeed the case. Let's first start with just recent polling. This is from the Real Clear Politics average of recent polling. And you'll notice if it's tightening, it's still looking pretty good for Democratic presidential candidate Hillary Clinton. If you look at this list of polls that I'm showing you, and we'll go through a few different things on it, at the very, very bottom of this list, and this is about 20 polls deep, right? You will see that in the Rasmussen Reports poll, back from the middle of October, Donald Trump is +2. And there's been some noise made about, oh, Rasmussen has Trump back in the lead. Yeah, not really. I mean, there have been moments where in the tracking, Trump has taken a small lead, but even the most recent Rasmussen Reports polls that you see one ending on October 26th. You see another one on this list ending October 25th. It's Clinton +1. Rasmussen is certainly the one that is the best for Donald Trump, but no, Donald Trump is not even winning in that one. And at the very top of that image, if we can put it back up for a second, you will notice the Real Clear Politics average of recent polls. This is four-way polling data, which has Hillary Clinton ahead by about 5.5 points. Gary Johnson starting to trail off, exactly as I predicted he would do, now below 6% average. And Jill Stein, the Green Party candidate, she had been at one point polling an average of about 3 to 4%, even 5 in some polls. I said unequivocally that Jill Stein will not get 5% of the vote, nor even 4% of the vote, and she has now settled at 1.8%. Okay, so nationally, a slight tightening, maybe. There was one point at which Hillary Clinton held about a 6.5 to 7 point average lead nationally in all polls. That now is about 5.5 points. A slight tightening, we can say, but it's not that tight right now. But as you know, we do not have a national, a popular vote election here. We have an electoral college. Actually, some people emailed me saying, David, you've got to say electoral college, not electoral. I've always said electoral. I don't know. I think I'm going to proceed that way, Pat, unless you have any strong feeling about it.
No, I barely even noticed the difference.
Yeah, it's good. That's exactly what I like to hear. So what is going on state by state electorally or electorally, depending on who you are and how you want me to pronounce it? There's been discussions of Florida is going in the direction of Donald Trump, Nevada going in the direction of Donald Trump. Right now, based on state polls, both electoral-vote.com and 538's forecast have Florida and Nevada for Hillary Clinton. Let's take a look now at the map from this morning on electoral-vote.com. And you will see that they have Florida, they have Nevada, they have Pennsylvania and Virginia and North Carolina and a number of other states that Donald Trump, as recently as yesterday, claimed were toss-ups. They have them in the Hillary Clinton camp. No ties currently, according to electoral-vote.com. Based on their map, Hillary Clinton, if the election were held today, would end up with about 323 electoral votes, way more than the number required to be the next president of the United States. Donald Trump, 215 electoral votes, way fewer than the number required to be president of the United States. So let's now round out our discussion of the numbers, and then we can move on to other things with Nate Silver's 538.com forecast. How have the chances of winning changed over time? And you will see that after reaching a high point in sort of around the 10th or 12th of October, there has been a very slight decrease in Hillary Clinton's chances of winning the election on November 8th and a very slight uptick for Donald Trump. Hillary Clinton had reached a high of about 88 or 89% chance of winning the November 8th election. That has dropped to 84.7% as of this morning, according to the 538.com forecast. So it's weird, Pat, because if we just say, oh, the race is tightening, well, Hillary Clinton's lead has been reduced a little bit. Hillary Clinton's chance of winning, according to 538.com, has been reduced a little bit. But big picture, there has not been a big change, and we're running out of days for Donald Trump here.
The change probably has to do with the Billy Bush tape starting to blow over at this point. And it was funny, too, because back in the primaries, Trump would go on and on about how he was winning in the polls.
Yeah.
And he's somehow become silent now that he's losing.
Yeah, he does still every once in a while when he shows up at speeches say, believe me, we're winning. The election's rigged. The polls are rigged. The media's rigged. The entire thing is rigged. You can't trust the polls. We're going to dig into that a little bit more later in the show. But now that we've gotten the polling part out of the way, I want to dig into questions I've been receiving about, could this be Brexit 2.0? Over the last couple of weeks, there's been a number of articles written. There's been a whole bunch of emails that I received saying, David, Trump has been talking about his election as Brexit 2.0. And when I first heard that, I said, oh, he must mean that the election is going to be yet another case in which the voters make a huge mistake and elect him like they voted to leave the European Union. That's not actually what our viewers meant. What our viewers were talking about was, in Brexit, there's this idea, and we'll figure out whether it's even true. You hear repeated very often that, oh, the polls said Brexit was going to lead to a vote to remain in the EU, whereas on election day, it was a huge shock, very different than the polls voters chose to leave the EU. I'm going to push back against even that, but let's sort of talk it through. Hillary Clinton winning in the polls. Okay. What if the polls are wrong? What if the polls, as Donald Trump has suggested, are like Brexit, where they said that British voters, UK voters, were going to vote to stay in the EU, but ended up actually voting to leave? Trump saying, we will win, we will shock the world, this is going to be Brexit-plus. Well, it doesn't match what the polls say, as I told you, but let's play it out, right? What if U.S. pollsters are just not polling shy Republicans? Or what if pollsters are not accounting for, I don't know, Trump's ability to, in the last few days before the election, inspire turnout in numbers that nobody is figuring could happen? It's important to know a few different things. Number one, the Brexit polling that showed that Remain was going to win was barely outside the margin of error. So I know you've probably been hearing, oh, the Brexit polls were overwhelmingly that there was going to be a vote to Remain, and it was a total shock because the results were so different. The polling just before the vote was pretty close, and it ended up 52-48 to Remain. Nate Silver has addressed this. Let's take a look at this tweet where Nate Silver said, repeating myself, but the Brexit polls weren't bad. Showed a toss-up. Question is why so few people believed them. So, number one, the entire Brexit analogy is not particularly good. However, this is a really good reason to make sure that you go out and vote rather than assume anything. But Brexit is not an apples to apples comparison. There are some major differences which suggest that we are not going to see a Brexit type, and I hesitate to even say that because we've debunked it, but a Brexit type situation where Hillary Clinton is leading almost every poll for weeks and weeks and weeks, and then on election day, Trump comes in and wins. Now, there's a few reasons for this. Number one is our voting system is different than what the Brexit vote was, right? Brexit required a simple majority of the popular vote. You get 50% plus one vote, and you win, period. We have an electoral college in the United States, and we have electoral college votes, and those are only somewhat in proportion to the popular vote. As an example, if you go back to 1984, Ronald Reagan had an overwhelming majority of the electoral college, right? Way, way, way more than 70, 80%. I don't even remember the exact number, but he had 58% of the popular vote because he won, I believe it was all states but Minnesota, by a little bit. So even a small lead in the U.S. in the popular vote can translate to a major win in the Electoral College. That's number one. Remember, President Obama was 0.2% ahead of Donald Trump nationally. Ahead of Mitt Romney. Came out with a 4% win in the popular vote, but had nearly 2/3 of the electoral vote. So right off the bat, Pat, I don't know that you can compare a popular vote referendum with our system of an electoral college and make any analogy.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And also the polls, how they are today, aren't necessarily how they're going to be a couple of weeks from now.
Sure.
Right on the day of the election and beforehand. We also look sometimes at election predictions, like by Nate Silver's 538.
Yeah.
And they usually say Hillary has an 85% chance. Well, the 15% chance that Trump wins could still happen.
Yeah, what that means is if you ran 100 elections based on current state-by-state polling and build in some additional variance in terms of how things could reasonably vary in certain states, 85 out of those 100 simulations, Hillary Clinton would win. 15 out of those 100 simulations, Donald Trump would win. And 15 is still a lot, right, for a guy who has no business being the Republican nominee. The other reason why I do not believe we are going to see a, quote, Brexit-style polling upset is polarization. Most voters in the United States are very reliably Republican or Democratic voters. So we can say anybody could vote for anybody on November 8th. The reality is that when you combine what we would call the base party voters with our electoral college system, it can only really swing to some degree, and it would only be enough to swing a few key states, and a so-called total surprise on election day just isn't very likely. The most important thing to get from this is get out and vote, right? Not just for president, but down ballot, because it is unlikely that we are going to see completely unpredictable upsets, but it is not impossible. And that is the message I'm going to be voting tomorrow in Massachusetts. On tomorrow's show, I will actually go through my ballot with you, item by item, election by election, question by question, and talk through what I'm going to be doing. And we'll review some interesting other ballot questions across the country, etc. Whatever you believe to be the truth about the polls, this is the most important possible thing I can tell you. Don't say I'm not going to vote. Don't say I'm going to stay home because I think my candidate has lost. Don't say I'm going to stay home because I think my candidate hasn't won without my help. That, for me, Pat, is the most important message here in this election. You just go out and vote.
Yeah, fulfill your civic obligation. If you don't vote, it tends to help the Republicans, and we need a good turnout for this election.
No doubt about it. So we will take a break. We'll talk about early voting later. I know a lot of people want me to address that. We do actually have a lot of voting already, over 7 million votes cast already. Mine will be one of them tomorrow. We'll talk about that later. Of course, I'm on Twitter at @DPakman.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new member of the day is Aaron Kralik. We really do need your support to keep the show growing and to keep the show on the air. And thanks to the support of members like Aaron and so many others, we are now a 5-day-a-week program. It's completely independently produced, funded primarily by our audience and members like Aaron. Please go to davidpakman.com/membership. Become a member. If you've been enjoying the show for free, that's absolutely fantastic, and that's the point of the show, for it to be available free to whoever wants it. But it is mathematically true that our paid subscribers are subsidizing the production of the show so that it can remain free for everybody who wants to watch or listen. davidpakman.com/membership is the one place to sign up for membership. I would really like it if you joined our Reddit discussion forum. This has grown. It started with a couple of hundred hardcore David Pakman Show fans who would post on our Reddit discussion forum at davidpakman.com/Reddit, REDDIT. And it has swelled now to over 1,500, over 1,500 people from our audience, which is still a very small portion of the audience, is involved in the discussion forum. Interview ideas are presented all the time there. Questions about the show, criticisms about the show, which I'm absolutely fine with, and we don't censor or remove in any way. It's a really great place for viewers and listeners to talk to each other. I'm on there daily. Pat now is on there. He's mixing it up on the David Pakman Show Reddit. So let's go through just a few of the different questions and discussions that have popped up that I found interesting over the last week. Really good question about fair use. We had a user, J473, who said, hey, when you play clips from CNN or wherever else, do you have to get permission from CNN? Are you permitted by law? What's the deal with that? And I sort of explained that fair use is something people often hear about. Fair use is something that would only be proven in the event of a copyright dispute. I believe that we are using clips from CNN, et cetera, as part of an analysis, and therefore it would be allowed under fair use. But you don't just use it under fair use. As a copyright attorney explained to us, fair use would be your defense if there was ever a dispute. And we've learned over time, you don't play anything from the NFL. They are very litigious and aggressive with copyright claims. You don't play anything from local news stations. So like Fox News, no problem playing stuff from Fox News. Fox 5 Dallas, Texas, for example, I don't even know if that exists. Do not go near that, because within seconds, in many cases, you will have a copyright claim against you. So that's the deal as far as that goes. Another interesting discussion from our Reddit discussion forum. Pakman, have you been watching Westworld? If not, why not? I've heard that Westworld is absolutely fantastic. I don't have HBO, so I haven't been able to get access to it. And I'll leave it there. I know there will be suggestions about illegal ways to obtain the show, but of course I would never do that. Also, we have been talking about what the names for the upcoming David Pakman Show coffee blends should be. We're going to have a custom espresso bean roast and a custom drip coffee bean roast. And we've had a lot of different suggestions there. One that I'm showing you here is related to a comment Lewis once made. If I accidentally brewed some coffee, I'd probably drink the coffee. It's funny, but not everybody will understand that reference. Lewis, of course, famously saying once, if I accidentally had a kid, I'd probably love the kid. And that became the stuff of legend from former producer Louis Motamedi. I like it. It's just a little too inside baseball, I think, Pat.
Yeah, that's a little bit too much of an inside joke, but there are definitely suggestions I like Progresso for one of them.
Yeah, except that's a soup brand.
Oh, yeah, I guess it is.
Progresso soup. I mean, it seems a little weird to use that, but there are some really good suggestions, and we're going to have some of them on Monday. Please keep sending them in, and the best ones will make it onto the show Monday. And then lastly, here's a suggestion from our Reddit discussion forum. Should David Pakman cover more local politics? I assume David Pakman works near Boston, so I'm sure there are races there that could be covered, and it would be interesting if he did. I'm going to go through my local ballot on tomorrow's show here in Massachusetts, but 99.9% of our audience is not voting in the same place that I'm voting, certainly not Boston, and most of the audience not in Massachusetts. So I don't know, Pat, how much it would be interesting to the audience for me to talk about the sheriff's race here in Suffolk County, for example.
But sometimes races here have national implications,
Absolutely.
like our Senate races, and I'm sure we'll be covering the 2018 Elizabeth Warren rerun, too.
If Kurt Schilling, former baseball player, runs against Elizabeth Warren, believe me, we're going to be covering that. That would be one of 100 senators in the U.S. Senate. So please join our Reddit discussion forum, davidpakman.com/REDDIT. A lot happening there. Let's talk about early voting. We have seen over 7 million Americans already vote. Nearly 5 million of those 7 million votes in what are called loosely battleground states. And this includes a representative sample of absentee ballots as well as early voting. Now, I'm going to be voting early tomorrow, Friday, here in Massachusetts. I was going to wait until November 8th to sort of be part of the whole scene. But I had a 15-minute wait to vote in the primary, and I can only imagine that the lines are going to be even longer to vote on November 8th, and I've got to be here to do the show. No time to waste, so I will be voting early. So what do we know so far about early voting? Well, the analysis is that in some states, Democrats have improved their position relative to now in 2012 early voting. And Republicans also have some good news. So the early voting numbers look good for Democrats in North Carolina, in Nevada, and in Arizona. Republicans seem to have some good news out of Iowa, and that is a state that Donald Trump conceivably could win this election. Florida is a really interesting one because both candidates are sort of claiming that Florida is good for them. And it's really the issue because, number one, Florida is the state most likely to swing the election. No one state is more than 50% likely to swing the election. But if you look at Nate Silver's 538.com, Florida is the state with the highest chance of swinging the election. I think something like 15 or 17%. So the Trump campaign is saying, oh, early voting is helping us in Florida. It's true that there are more Republicans than Democrats that have done early voting in Florida. But here's the confusion. The Republican early voting in Florida, their lead is far smaller than it was in 2012. So Republicans are saying, hey, if you look at raw early voting totals in Florida, more Republicans have voted than Democrats. Democrats are looking at Florida and saying, in early voting at this point in 2012, we were way down to Republicans, and this time we're barely down to Republicans. So it's really a matter of how you want to look at the numbers. And I, Pat, am finding the Democratic argument here far more compelling, which is last year, Obama won Florida, and you were down big to Republicans at this point in early voting. And now you're barely down to Republicans. That to me seems like an improvement for Democrats.
Yeah, I think all signs at this point point to a Trump landslide loss. And I mean, at this point, he'd have to win all the swing states and pick off something like Pennsylvania or New Hampshire or Colorado, states where he's down like 10%.
And it's been increasingly suggested, including by Senator Rand Paul, who was one of the 17 original Republican candidates for president this year, that the polls showing Hillary ahead are designed to suppress turnout. He was on a program called the Tom Roten Morning Show on 800 WVHU, West Virginia. I don't understand how this argument makes sense. Let's listen to it and see if we can figure it out.
But what about the national polls that have Hillary way out in front? Here we are less than 2 weeks before the election. Can Donald Trump pull this off?
You know, I think sometimes polling is done to dampen election turnout. So when Trump says the thing's rigged, I'm not sure exactly what he means, and I'm not sure I always agree with him, but I do think that when we say over and over someone can't win, that is a form of rigging in the sense that it is designed to suppress turnout.
This is genuine BS from Rand Paul. You're talking about multiple overlapping levels of nonsense. First of all is the idea that if you think your candidate is losing, you're less likely to vote. That may be true, but it could be argued that if you think your candidate is down, you'll actually go vote, right? I mean, Pat, I think that you could make the case that if you really don't want Hillary Clinton to win, and you keep hearing that Hillary is winning, maybe you would stay home if you think Trump has no shot, but maybe you would be more inspired and motivated to go out and vote.
Yeah, Trump's doing no favors to himself. He's only suppressing his own vote. And we know that Rand Paul, too, is up for re-election for his Senate seat.
There is the concern on the Clinton side that if people think she's well ahead, they won't vote thinking she doesn't need their vote. So that's also an angle, which is it's a really risky strategy for Hillary Clinton to say, oh, let's rig the polls. How she would do it, I don't know. Let's rig the polls to make it seem like we're winning, because that also, Pat, could make it so that Hillary supporters say, oh, even though she's really only up by 1, the polls have been rigged to say she's up 10. She doesn't need my vote anymore. I think that Rand Paul's allegations here make no sense because it's to Hillary Clinton's detriment to do this.
Yeah, we know that if a contest is close, that drives up voter turnout, because if you look at swing states over the years, there's like a 10% higher turnout rate for states that are competitive.
There's the polls themselves also, which are done by pollsters. And number one, there's no evidence that pollsters are skewing polls to show Hillary ahead. Number two, there's no really good reason to think that pollsters would do that. And number three, there's really no realistic explanation as to why Hillary Clinton would want that. The best way, as Pat just pointed out, to skew polls in order to help someone would be if you're ahead, if you're Hillary Clinton and you're really up 8, you would want to skew the polls to show that they're tied, because then people thinking she needs my vote would not stay home. So this entire hypothesis from Rand Paul really doesn't pass the smell test. It smells like BS, and it absolutely is. Let me talk briefly about Utah. What's happening in Utah is absolutely fascinating. The background is that there's this independent Mormon candidate, Evan McMullin, and I've told you that Mormons are really voting their conscience in a logical way. Evangelical Christians, they seem to have thrown morals, ethics, and their conscience completely out the window and into the trash, I would argue. Donald Trump, the overwhelming support of evangelicals, he had nearly 80% support from evangelical Christians at one point. That's dropped to about 2/3 support, but it still makes no sense from the group of voters that claims to be the moral, ethical majority, voting for the guy with the multiple wives and the wife who has been in, I hesitate to call it pornography, but certainly not material that you would think would be acceptable to the evangelical Christians. The guy who for his entire life has been pro-choice, although I guess now they've been bamboozled into thinking Trump is actually anti-abortion. There's no reason that evangelical Christians should be voting for Donald Trump, but they are anyway. Mormons, on the other hand, particularly Mormons in Utah, have said no. They've said Donald Trump does not represent our conscience. He does not represent our morals and values. And by and large, in numbers that we have not seen in Utah for a very long time, Mormons are not overwhelmingly supporting Donald Trump. And if you look at early voting in Utah, first of all, if you look at polling in Utah, it's not a gimme for Trump. This independent Mormon candidate, Evan McMullin, is very close to, within the margin of error, of leading the state of Utah. That is fascinating in and of itself. But also in early voting in Utah, a third more Utah Democrats have voted so far than what would normally be expected in early turnout for by-mail voting, and fewer than predicted Republicans have been casting ballots in Utah. Now, Pat, we don't know how someone votes, but if we know that more Democrats than expected and fewer Republicans than expected have been voting, that does tell us something.
Yeah, because Utah has been a ruby red state for a long time, and I think that Democrats will see that the race is close in a four-way race and may be encouraged to go out and vote. I don't know about you, but I'm rooting for Evan McMullin in this race.
Yeah, I mean, I'm rooting for the Republican candidate not winning. That, you know, Evan McMullin, I saw him on CNN this morning giving this, quite frankly, delusional perspective where if he can win Utah and one other state, and if the math works out so that he blocks both candidates from getting to 270 electoral votes, then it would be the House of Representatives and the Senate that would decide, and that then it would be the opportunity for the Republicans who now realize that Trump is a disaster to select Evan McMullin and his running mate, whose name is escaping me now, I apologize, to handpick Evan McMullin to be the next president of the United States. This is a total and utter fantasy, right? It's not even likely that McMullin is going to win Utah, but I've said it before and I'll say it again. The fact that the Republican nominee does not have Utah guaranteed is stunning.
Yeah, that whole scenario is kind of far-fetched, I would say. Of course, he's playing spoiler. I just hope he wins because we haven't had a third party win a state since George Wallace in 1968.
Yep, no doubt about it. And Democrats in red states, they smell blood in the water, and they are getting out to vote clearly. It is not a lost cause. We've talked about Georgia and Texas with the potential to be swing states. This year, North Carolina looks like it's going to be blue. And if, and this is a very unlikely if Hillary Clinton or Evan McMullin end up taking Utah, I think Trump will end up winning, but by a little bit, it would be a just slap in the face to Donald Trump Republicans who thought this is our guy. He is not an insider, although the billionaire who uses money to buy politicians in Washington and is proud of it, not exactly an outsider to the political system, right? This is going to be a very, very serious. And of course, Trump, you know, Trump, believe me, I've hired the best investigators, tremendous investigators, okay, the best. They're looking into Utah. They're taking a look at Utah's papers. I'm not sure what they'll find, but people are saying Utah is not a state, Pat, and Trump has the best people looking into that right now.
What's funny, too, is he's actually sending his running mate, Mike Pence, to campaign in Utah.
Yeah.
Who would think that in the last few weeks in the election cycle, you'd need to send one of your big operatives to Utah? I mean, that's just insane.
It's unheard of. Romney, I think, and I mean, Romney, a Mormon, understandably, high Mormon population there. I think Romney ended up with like 68 or 73% of the vote in Utah, just overwhelmingly red. And Trump may pull it all out to attribute it all to the vote rigging thing. And he might as well come out and say, Massachusetts and Virginia, those aren't even states. Those are commonwealths. This is America. We're going to have a country here. We're going to have states. No commonwealths voting. I'm suing crooked Hillary getting these votes in commonwealths. It's all rigged, Pat.
Well, it's funny because even back in the primaries, Trump was talking about how he would have a chance in New York and California. Now he can't even hold his own ground.
Yeah, 99.9% chance of Hillary Clinton winning Massachusetts and New York and California, all these states, according to Nate Silver's 538 forecast. Trump just doesn't know what he's talking about, and that's really not a surprise to anybody.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Donald Trump supporter and former New York City Mayor Rudy Giuliani said that not only is it wrong to call Donald Trump racist, it's wrong to call anyone a racist, going into the world of words have no meaning and we can't truly know anything. Speaking on MSNBC yesterday morning, he reacted to questions about Donald Trump and racism in this way.
The hate and the racism out of so many people who are saying we're going to create
racism. There's no racism.
You don't think Breitbart News, Stephen Bannon, the architect,
News is not running for office.
But Stephen Bannon is the architect of Donald Trump's campaign right now. What do you believe Breitbart
Nobody runs
represents?
Donald Trump's campaign, but
then
Donald
what do you
Trump.
call the CEO of his campaign?
And for all this stuff you're throwing around, racist. The last thing in the world Donald Trump is a racist. I know him for 28 years. The man likes white people. He likes black people. He likes Hispanic people. He plays golf with them. He opened up the first club in Palm Beach that allowed Jewish people, black people, Italian people like me who couldn't get into those clubs to get into those clubs.
But can you say that Stephen Bannon doesn't run Donald Trump's campaign? He's the CEO of the campaign.
Donald Trump runs Donald Trump's campaign.
Then what's he doing even paying Stephen Bannon? He doesn't
there are a
need
lot
him.
of people that do different things, but to say that Donald Trump is a racist is outrageous. And to call anybody a racist is outrageous.
Well, hold on.
I can't
There are
stand
people
that.
you can call racist.
Well, you can't call him a racist because the man has done more for minorities over the last 30 years in terms of opening facilities for them, hiring them, promoting.
Yeah, Trump opened for-profit facilities for minorities. He's the good guy here. What does that mean, though, to say it's outrageous to call anyone racist? It has become where, according to Republicans, calling someone racist is worse than actually being racist. And if Donald Trump isn't a racist, then we have to look at whether things he has done have disproportionately negatively impacted non-white people in this particular case. He's been sued multiple times because he was blocking black people from renting apartments in his buildings. At least now I guess we have the standard for racism, Pat, which is, hey, Trump has played golf with non-white people. He can't possibly be a racist. And news alert, by the way, as a general rule, most racists deny being racist.
And poor Rudy Giuliani, too. He had such a fall from grace. I mean, the guy was a popular mayor of New York City. It actually looked like he was going to win the 2008 Republican nomination for a while. And ever since, he's just become a Trump apologist, and it really doesn't look good for him.
This is the guy who called Trump a genius, right? Should we be skeptical of people who call Trump a genius? I think we should. And I completely disagree with the idea that calling people racist is objectively outrageous. I do agree that it is hard to know for sure what's in someone's head, right? You don't know whether someone has conscious racist beliefs or subconsciously racist beliefs. But the idea that you can't use the term racism when talking about others is very, very silly to me. And what's fascinating is that the right usually slams the left for not being willing to call things what they are because they don't want to use certain terms, right? You hear the right say, oh, the left won't use this term. The left is afraid to use that term. But then they say, oh, you just can't be calling people racist. It's the exact same type of thing that we're seeing from Rudy Giuliani that usually they critique the left for doing, saying, oh, language policing is bad. Well, there's a lot of Republicans saying, hey, the use of the term racist is just objectively wrong, bad, and outrageous, as Rudy Giuliani is saying. The total double standard.
Right. I mean, you can't really look into someone's head and see if they're racist or not, but
No.
you can look at the actions that they've taken.
Sure.
And Trump is a guy that has been sued repeatedly for housing discrimination upon a bunch of other things, the comments that he's made.
I've been talking to you about what's happening on college campuses and the issues of anti-Israeli bias on college campuses, and also the issue of anti-Semitism on college campuses. Now, to be super clear, being anti-Israeli is not inherently anti-Semitic. There is overlap in those two movements, in those two ideologies. But every time we talk about this, I get emails being anti-Israeli or critiquing Israeli foreign policy or domestic policy. That is not inherently anti-Semitic, but it has served as cover for anti-Semites in many cases. Now, let's discuss the term occupation for a second. The term occupation is typically used in relation to the current situation in Israel with regard to Gaza and the Gaza blockade, as well as the West Bank, right? So there are debates over, is what's happening in Israel now an occupation of Gaza and the West Bank? Is what's happening in Israel now a logical reaction to the security concerns that are well documented with regard to attacks on Israelis and Israel? This is a question that often comes up. However, Portland State University's Student Senate went a step further, showing that they know absolutely nothing about what's going on in Israel, by passing one of these boycott and divestment resolutions, which alleges that Israel has been occupying Palestinian land since its establishment in 1948, and that all Israeli companies and companies that work with the Israeli military must be boycotted. Now, this isn't just Portland State University. In language that is similar, in a BDS resolution from the National Women's Studies Association, they wrote, and I'll put the quote up on the screen for you here, whereas the Israeli occupation of Palestinian land has been entrenched since 1948, during the 1948 Palestine War, over 700,000 Palestinians were expelled, et cetera, et cetera. Again, the occupation starting in 1948. Wait a second. What? We can have a discussion about whether the current situation is a willy-nilly occupation or a situation required by the security realities in the area or somewhere in between, right? That's a very legitimate and important conversation to have. The idea that Israel's mere creation is the occupation is laughably out of this world, and I would love to talk to some of these women's studies individuals who passed this resolution, or people from the Portland State University State Senate that passed this resolution. It's like they think one day Israel appeared and confiscated sovereign Palestinian land. And I've said this before, and it bears repeating. Countries are created one of three ways on this planet. This applies to all countries. One, annexation or purchase. That's one way in which countries are created. Two, war or invasion or takeover. And three, international treaty. Israel was created by international treaty. Its existence is no more or less legitimate than the existence of any other country. If you are going to not do business with companies that do business with Israel, based on Israel being an occupying force, not because of what's going on now in Gaza and the West Bank, but from its mere creation in 1948, you should not be doing business with any American company whatsoever. Because by that same logic, this entire thing we call the United States of America, most of it, and the part that was purchased at a pittance, that's a kind of difficult word to say, for a very small amount of money, a total ripoff, right, from natives that were here before Europeans came. And you could argue that it is just as much of an occupation as what's going on in Israel. But I want to go further, right? Because there's a lot of people who don't even realize that Israel was not created from land that wasn't previously some Palestinian country. This goes back to understanding the history of the British Empire controlling the land. And this goes back even further to the Ottoman Empire. It involves Jordan. It is far more complex than any harebrained resolution from the National Women's Studies Association or the Portland State University State Senate would be. But the bigger picture is that this is a pointless resolution. In June, Portland State President Wim Wewell called the resolution divisive and ill-informed, but he also said that there is no practical effect here at all, since the funds for the university are not managed by the state Senate. This is a declaration, a boycott, a sanction that has absolutely no impact whatsoever, period. So this is a waste of time on something that is both pointless and factually incorrect. And it's really sad that this nonsense is happening on college campuses across the country.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
A self-driving truck packed with beer has made its first delivery. You might remember that I told you a little while back about Uber buying Otto. Otto is a company that had a self-driving truck technology, which Uber has purchased. And now there's been what some are attributing to sort of a publicity stunt, a self-driving truck with nobody behind the wheel, but there was a sort of supervisor riding in the cab, actually drove together, teamed up with Anheuser-Busch InBev, the first driverless truck delivery of beer. And there was a police cruiser in tow. It drove 120 miles when the driver was just hanging out in the sleeper cab. And it's mostly a stunt. They basically wanted to show that the building blocks of self-driving truck technology are there. AB InBev, which is Anheuser-Busch, the company that makes a lot of the beer that maybe you drink, they said they could save $50 million a year in the U.S. if they can deploy these autonomous trucks across their entire distribution network. And that's even if drivers continue to be doing ride-alongs and supplementing the technology. The fuel cost reduction and the more frequent delivery schedule and the ability to drive way more hours than a human driver is able to drive would reduce costs drastically. Now, here's where it starts to get a little funny. One of the spokespeople for Uber said that they don't plan to build their own trucks and want to partner with automakers, and also that they may continue to use the supervision of humans indefinitely. I just don't buy it, Pat. I mean, we know that the building blocks are there for not needing a human in the car, and in the cab, the car, the truck, whatever the case may be. I don't buy for a second that indefinitely the idea is to, it'll be self-driving, but we're still going to pay someone to just ride along, maybe at the beginning, maybe until the law gets sorted out, but I don't see it long term.
Right, it's part of the transition, I would bet. And how easy of a job would it be too to be the driver, so to speak, but the car's moving autonomously, so you just have to kind of watch everything over. I mean, you just have to be attentive for long shifts.
The U.S. trucking industry has so much to lose and also so much to gain from autonomous trucks, right? I mean, so much to lose in that they're going to lose jobs. Millions of jobs are going to be lost. There's an estimate that there's about 3.5 million professional truck drivers in the U.S. Some estimates are higher, some are a little bit lower. Those are all jobs which, by and large, will be eliminated. That's just going to happen. When I say that there's a lot to gain, what I mean is that the trucking industry is responsible for and connected to many, many accidents and fatalities, and those could be reduced drastically. The idea of a tired driver making mistakes, the idea of driver error will be almost completely eliminated with this technology. I see this as unavoidable. It just doesn't make sense to think we're going to Mars in the next 10 years, which I believe that we are. By 2026, I think that there will be at least an unmanned supply mission to Mars to start some kind of exploration there. Robotic surgery continues to advance, all of these innovations. But still, in 15 years, we're going to have people susceptible to tiredness, able to drive only a portion of the day, restricted by physical and legal constraints, manually driving massive trucks around our highways. It's just impossible to believe.
And a fascinating angle to this, too, is at what point do we outlaw manual driving, just having people do it? Because we know that people are going to be responsible for more accidents than these automated vehicles are.
Conservatives talk about that a lot, about the loss of freedom and just how fundamentally American it is to get out there and to drive around. And I get it. I enjoy driving in many ways. But the reality is, at least as far as highway trips go, and that's the initial thing here with the driverless trucks, which is it's still complex to maneuver and back in these trucks at loading docks and in cities. I mean, in our studio area here, a lot of trucks drive around. These are tight corners. That technology is going to be further off in terms of automation. But as far as the highway driving for trucks, and as far as personal driving, I would love it if on a highway trip, I didn't have to drive at all and I could just make phone calls or send text messages, read articles, whatever. That's going to happen. And I personally look forward to it. I think that there will be opportunities to drive no matter what. And even if we start moving away from driving for transportation purposes, particularly on the highway, I don't think we're going to lose this activity of driving that many people like.
And of course, we know that technology is going to improve too. I mean, there has been some fatalities from autonomous cars, and that has to be worked on.
Yeah.
And also
although, if you actually look at the details, you can't necessarily attribute it to it being an autonomous vehicle per se.
Yeah, I mean, I'd have to look at the story again.
Yeah.
Also, there's an issue of passing trucks. I mean, autonomous cars want to veer off too much away from these trucks, as a lot of people do too.
All stuff that technology, I am sure, is going to eventually figure out. Zach wrote to me yesterday saying, hey, David, I live in Israel, and I saw you tonight on Israeli TV. And this was on Channel 10. It was a segment about Donald Trump sort of coalescing the anti-Semitic vote around himself. Let's check it out. This particular clip is from when Donald Trump went to a room full of Jewish business people and said, all of you people obviously negotiate, right? Which had such incredibly stereotypical anti-Semitic undertones. That segment was used last night in Israeli Channel 10 news. Let's check it out.
Donald Trump has built his campaign on prejudice and paranoia.
טראמפ הצליח לעורר זעם בקרב רבים כשהשתמש בסטריאוטיפים יהודיים כשדיבר מול תומכיו היהודים.
I'm a negotiator like you folks. We're negotiators. You want to renegotiate deals? Some of us renegotiate deals. I would say about 99.9. Is there anybody that doesn't renegotiate deals in this room? This room negotiates.
He might as well have said, listen, like you, I know how to Jew people down in negotiations, and I've experienced that firsthand. People have used that term in front of me, and it didn't go that well after that. None of those people are still my friends.
ואז הגיע גם עניין הכסף.
An image of Hillary Clinton with what was a Star of David over a pile of money, calling her a corrupt politician.
מוטיב הכסף חזר על עצמו גם
A lot of people asking me, how did Channel 10 in Israel get this, especially since it's an older clip? I have no idea. No one contacted me. But I'm thrilled that they used a segment of the show, and I have no plans, by the way, of filing any copyright strikes against Channel 10 in Israel. They use this under fair use, I would argue, as part of a broader peace. And with peace and love, I have no problem with them using this.
But in exchange, we have to get the music that they used, so we can play that during the show.
That is dramatic music. I really do like that. Okay, so first time on Israeli TV. Pretty cool. Thanks for Zach for sending that to me. I have a voicemail number. That number is 219-2-DAVID-P. It's been a while since we heard from Homeless Daryl. Now, Pat, you might not know about Homeless Daryl. Homeless Daryl is a guy also known as Daryl in a ditch, Daryl in a field, Scrub Okie Daryl, Diabetic Daryl. Daryl has any number of names, quite literally. And he used to call in pretty frequently, hasn't called in for a while. Cannabis is an issue that is very important to Scrub Okie Daryl, and that motivated him to call in and check in with us. Let's take a listen.
Hey, David. Great show as always, and it looks like things are still looking up. Although I'm glad to hear you're reporting on cannabis and that you're voting pro-cannabis, but I wish you wouldn't use the word marijuana. It has negative connotations.
Yeah.
The better preferred nomenclature is cannabis, please. Thank you. Bye.
Yeah, no problem. It's always great to hear from Daryl, even if it is a critique, but that's a common thing where people say, David, you should give more legitimacy to cannabis by calling it cannabis instead of marijuana. I think there's something to that, but it comes out naturally for me to say marijuana.
Yeah, I've never even heard of this critique. And as long as you're using with a J and not an H, the word marijuana, I think you're good.
Yeah, the H is, does that refer back to Reefer Madness era?
Yeah, I think it's pretty antiquated at this point. They probably didn't want to use that seemingly Hispanic way of pronouncing it.
Oh, interesting. I didn't even think of that angle, but yeah, I know exactly what you're saying. Okay, good to hear from Daryl. Always good to hear from him. On the bonus show today, we will talk about why is work being fetishized in a way at least in some industries in the United States. Number two, there is a fast food chain that has combined fried chicken and pizza. They call it Chizza. It sounds vile. We will talk about that. And also, Twitter is laying off nearly 10% of its workforce. And I have some thoughts about Twitter, and I know our audience does as well. So we will talk about all of those stories and more on today's bonus show. Please, please, please don't miss the bonus show. Our paid subscribers are so important to the success and future of the show that every day we create an additional show just for our paid subscribers. So please sign up at davidpakman.com/membership. It'll feel great, believe me. And you will get instant access to the bonus show, the commercial-free TV show, and so many other great member benefits.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.